what's happening on college campuses right now is wrong. It is un-American. It is not who we are.
Protecting students is our number one responsibility. We take that seriously, and the anti-Semitism that we've seen on campus is unacceptable.
Pro-Palestinian protesters have occupied a building on Columbia's main campus, heightening tensions and creating more chaos after the university delivered an ultimatum: disperse or face suspension. The NYPD, closely watching, has no plans to enter the campus until the university makes an official request. Over in Austin, dozens of demonstrators were arrested at the University of Texas as Governor Greg Abbott faces increasing scrutiny on his response to the protests. Joining me now, the Hill's White House reporter, Brett Samuels. Hi, Brett. Now that student protesters have taken over a building at Columbia University, what is the White House's response?
Yeah, well, we've seen the White House has sort of been cautious about weighing in on these protests, but they did actually make a point to weigh in and kind of push back after these students at Columbia occupied this building on campus, essentially saying that this is not something that the White House supports, that they feel that this is too aggressive, that this is not a peaceful and sort of responsible way to protest and get their point across. So the White House has sort of been keeping an eye on this and sort of choosing their spots to weigh in. But the occupation of this building on campus was a case where the White House felt these protesters had gone too far.
Now, the University of Texas has arrested dozens of protesters, and Greg Abbott is facing backlash over his handling of the protest. Are we seeing a major difference in how red states versus blue states are reacting?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there have been some differences. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, there have been these protests really across the country. So where the protests are happening are not, limited to red states or blue states. But the reaction from governors, for example, Greg Abbott, as you said, we saw him really aggressively deploy law enforcement to disperse these protests. We saw a journalist arrested at one of those protests in Texas last week. Whereas in blue states, for example, New York, where Columbia, these protests are happening, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, has said that he doesn't think the National Guard is necessary, which the governor has yet to call in there. Red states, Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis in Florida have really aggressively threatened action against some of the students if they are seen participating in these protests. So certainly some red state governors have been more aggressive, I think, than their blue state counterparts, even though both are grappling with these protests.
Trump spoke outside the courtroom this morning, slamming the judge again.
This is a judge who's conflicted, badly conflicted. I've never seen a judge so conflicted, and giving us virtually no rulings. I hear I'm not even allowed to say advice of counsel. This is a new one to me, advice of counsel. When you have a lawyer.
The judge overseeing Trump's hush money case in New York came down with a ruling on the gag order this morning. What's the outcome, and how far is the judge willing to go to enforce this order?
Yeah, this was a pretty significant ruling from Judge Mershon in this case, fining Donald Trump $9,000 for violating the gag order repeatedly, pointing to social media posts that Trump had made about Michael Cohen in particular, who's a witness, an expected witness in this case, as well as other potential witnesses, which was prohibited under this gag order. So Trump is facing this $9,000 fine in the meantime, but the judge also warned that Trump could face jail time if he continues to violate the gag order moving forward. So this is a real test to see whether Trump, whether he's going to continue to push back on this gag order, continue to go after folks like Michael Cohen, and sort of position himself as a martyr and basically dare the judge to put him in jail over this, or whether this $9,000 fine and the threat of jail time is enough to rein Trump in on this case.
Congresswoman Elise Stefanik is increasingly seen as a possible running mate for Donald Trump. Stefanik filed an ethics complaint against federal prosecutor Jack Smith. Is this a move by Stefanik to try and win favor in the eyes of Trump?
I think it's fair to read it that way. Yeah, we've seen Congresswoman Stefanik has in the past also filed ethics complaints against one of the judges in New York who was overseeing Trump's civil case over his business dealings. So this is sort of part of a pattern that we're seeing from Elise Stefanik in particular, where she is pushing back at these judges who Trump himself is attacking as unfair and biased. So clearly an effort by Congresswoman Stefanik to echo that message coming from former President Trump. Obviously, as you mentioned, she's sort of on the short list of potential running mates for Donald Trump, has really been an outspoken ally of his. And so something like this to kind of garner headlines, to get attention from Trump potentially, to show and reiterate that she's on his side, could definitely be read as sort of an effort to make sure she stays in his good graces and sort of front of mind when he's considering potential vice presidential picks.
Attention is swirling around South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem's new book and an item where she describes shooting a family dog. It's certainly a gruesome headline, but she hasn't really been backing down from her account. How is this playing out politically for her? What is the fallout?
As you might expect, it is not playing very well for Kristi Noem that she openly wrote about shooting a 14-month-old dog about 20 years ago because of bad behavior. As you said, she has not really backed down on this. She took to social media after this excerpt first circulated and went on social media to say, that she felt that this story illustrated her willingness to make difficult decisions, and she was following the law, which allows for dogs exhibiting aggressive behavior to be put down. So she is trying to spin this as, hey, voters, I'm willing to make tough decisions and be authentic and share these stories. But sources who I've talked to, especially in former President Trump's camp, basically view her as sort of dead on arrival, basically, as one source told me, as far as her vice presidential prospects. So this really is not the news cycle that Kristi Noem wanted as far as her national profile goes.
The U.S. reports 5 units of their Israeli security forces are responsible for violating human rights. How is the Biden White House responding to this report at a time when Secretary of State Antony Blinken is currently negotiating a ceasefire and the president is already facing growing dissatisfaction over his handling of Israel?
Yeah, this is just sort of the latest example of a tightrope that the Biden administration is trying to walk when it comes to the conflict between Israel and Hamas and the situation in Gaza. The Biden administration responding to those reports of humanitarian violations, human rights violations, is basically holding their fire for now. They're not doing anything. They're not imposing sanctions. They're not saying that they're going to withhold aid over this. And it just kind of gets at the difficult choices that the Biden administration has to make, and this needle that they're trying to thread between, on the one hand, supporting Israel and providing military support for Israel in its war against Hamas, and on the other hand, really trying to pressure Israel, especially behind the scenes, to do more to protect civilians, to make sure humanitarian aid is getting into Gaza. So certainly this is not going to stop criticism of folks who say the Biden administration is not doing enough to hold Israel accountable for violations like this. But the Biden administration is really caught between a rock and a hard place here, and they're just going to kind of wait and try to let this one play out.
Trump is leading Biden in 7 key battleground states, according to new surveys from the Hill and Emerson College polling. What's happening with undecided voters in these states?
Yeah, this is the latest round of polls that are really good news pretty much for former President Trump, especially while he's on trial in New York City. They do, on the one hand, show Trump winning, leading President Biden in these 7 states that are likely to decide November's election. You have Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. But on the other hand, for the Biden campaign, there are some signs of good news. A state like Nevada, for example, this poll showed that Trump's lead is just about 1 percentage point. And other states also show Biden within a couple of points of Trump. So there are signs that the race is really tightening and that we're headed for what experts expect will be a close election in November. But certainly Trump has to feel good about this, knowing that he has been on trial. He's had some negative headlines for the last couple of weeks, and yet he continues to lead Biden in these key swing states.
This poll also hones in on key congressional races, looking closer at the upcoming Senate race in Arizona. Democratic Representative Ruben Gallego and Republican Kari Lake are neck and neck, with Gallego leading by just 2 points. How are we seeing the recent abortion ruling impacting the late polling numbers there?
Yeah, this abortion ruling in Arizona, which the court upheld an 1864 law that makes abortion a felony in the state, has really been good news for Democrats. Abortion is obviously a huge driver for their voters. It really helps turnout. It has helped turn out since the midterms and in special elections since. So this is big news for Democrats. It could potentially help Ruben Gallego in a state where he, as you mentioned, has really been neck to neck with Kari Lake heading into November. So Kari Lake has sort of flip-flopped as far as her response to this abortion ruling. Democrats have really seized on that. So Arizona is definitely a state to keep an eye on, both as a presidential battleground, but also this Senate race that could determine control of the upper chamber.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is nearing the end of his days on Capitol Hill, and as it all winds down, he's without a doubt speaking more freely, criticizing Tucker Carlson, going after Republicans opposed to aiding Ukraine. What kind of influence does McConnell have within his own party at this point, and can we expect more of this type of talk going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question because on the one hand, he has been more outspoken. He obviously was a really driving force behind passing this national security supplemental with aid to Ukraine and Israel and other U.S. allies. And McConnell spoke about how that was really sort of a defining effort for him during this Congress. On the other hand, he has endorsed former President Trump, so he is sort of falling in line with the party line there. But as you said, he said he's going to retire at the end of his term. The question is basically, if he has endorsed former President Trump, how will he speak out on other issues? Will he speak out against the nominee if he says controversial things, as we all expect he will the next few months? Or does the rest of the Republican conference really kind of view McConnell as a lame duck leader, and they just kind of feel free to ignore what he says on this? So that's the question, is basically whether this Ukraine aid was sort of a last stand for McConnell, or if it's a sign that he'll continue to really speak out and be a driving force in the Republican Party for the next few months.
Today, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene posted on social media that she is vowing to move ahead with a vote to oust Speaker Johnson. But Democrats are throwing the Speaker a lifeline and say they will block any motion to vacate. Now, without support, what is the motivation to continue with these type of threats?
Yeah, well, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is certainly no stranger to making sure the spotlight is kept on her, making sure she stays in the headlines. So on the one hand, I think this is definitely an effort to make sure that both her and this threat against Speaker Johnson remains in the news cycle. On the other hand, her motivation is she's sort of spoken about the idea of, if Democrats want to save Speaker Johnson, then that sort of benefits her belief that Johnson is not truly a conservative speaker who aligns with her views, that she can then go out and argue that Democrats voted to support this speaker, that he's, the democratically backed speaker. So it benefits her in that way. Now, the question is, how many people really care in the Republican Party, just because she has very little support here. Just a couple other Republican lawmakers have backed her motion to vacate the chair with Speaker Johnson. And it seems like the backlash she predicted over the Ukraine vote didn't really materialize. So, she may be on an island with this one, but she does seem to think that this will ultimately help her continue to message to the conservative base and former President Trump's base about Speaker Johnson and how she's standing up to the quote-unquote uniparty here.
Thank you, Brett Samuels. 5 Republican-led states are suing the Biden administration over the Department of Education's new changes to Title IX. Under the new rules, schools would not be able to adopt policies that would bar students from using facilities or competing in accordance with their gender identity. On Monday, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a suit calling the new rules, quote, illegal, undemocratic, and divorced from reality. Attorneys general in Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, and Idaho filed a separate suit Monday, saying the new rule exceeds the Education Department's authority. In addition to the suits, Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis have directed their state education departments to ignore the changes. The new rules are set to take effect August 1st. Republican Matt Gaetz is facing a last-minute challenger for his congressional seat. Former naval aviator Aaron Dimmick filed to run as a Republican in Florida's 1st congressional district. According to Dimmick's LinkedIn profile, he recently served as the director of the Missouri Leadership Academy. Gaetz is already attacking Dimmick, calling him, quote, Missouri's based DEI instructor. Dimmick is Gaetz's only Republican challenger in Florida's August primary. A new bipartisan bill unveiled Tuesday. Democratic Senator Brian Schatz and Republican Senator Ted Cruz introducing legislation to limit kids' use of social media. The bill limits children's ages 13 and under from accessing social media sites. It also gives schools the ability to block access to social media and prohibits social media companies from programming algorithms for teens younger than 17. Lawmakers say there is growing evidence that social media is having a negative effect on teens, leading to depression and anxiety, and they have blamed social media companies from doing little to nothing to prevent it. The bill is getting marked up Wednesday by the Senate Commerce Committee. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Margaret Chadbourn. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon at the intersection between politics and policy.